Babba, hi, welcome to the Female Startup Club podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
How's your day going? Have you got any wins or oh shit moments that you can share?
My day is going good. It's been stressful. I'm actually just in my hopefully final stretches of fundraising process. So yeah, it's like things get thrown at me, from left and right.
Oh my gosh, wow. Well, you're on that journey. Back to back calls, I'm sure. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm so excited.
Let's get straight into this episode and rewind back to your life before Ceremonia. Where do you like to start your story? Where do you kind of like to kick things off?
Honestly, in many ways, this story goes all the way back to like childhood me because in many ways, Ceremonia is sort of like the result of, so many things in my life. And it really starts with my upbringing. I sometimes introduce myself as a Swedish Latina. I grew up in Sweden, but both my parents are from Chile. And I grew up as, your typical immigrant kid with, two parents who did not speak the language. I had to be their translator a lot. And I just remember having to take a lot of responsibility from an early age. But then on the flip side, I also gained so much inspiration from my parents. They taught me a lot that has set the foundation for my company today, actually. Although back then I would never imagined going in any sort of direction, even remotely close to my parents. But a fun story is actually that my dad was a hairdresser back in Chile. When he moved to Sweden, he was never able to get a job in the field due to the language barrier. So he just ended up practicing it on me. Literally, we grew up very humble. Like we had barely any furniture at home, but he had his like little sort of like hairdresser corner in the living room because we had space since we didn't have any other furniture, and with a little cart filled with products. And every day I would come down in whatever crazy outfit I had put together as like, an 8-year-old young girl. And he would do my hair and like match my hair clips to my outfit. So yeah, I grew up with this very rich relationship to beauty in a way, and also very sort of like healthy relationship to beauty that pertain more about self-care and self-love. And my mom, she's like, she has no clue how to, do a makeup or a contour or a hairdo for that matter. But she's incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to the care aspect of beauty. And she, would do hair masks together with me. She taught me to like mix oil with my body lotion because we had really dry skin, and like all these like hacks that just pertained, that were rooted in this idea of using beauty as a form of self-care. That's today a huge part of the inspiration behind my brand.
Wow, that's so amazing and so intrinsically linked to what you've put out in the world today. Do you think when you look back at that time, you could see yourself being an entrepreneur? Did you want to start a business or it wasn't even on your radar?
So, truth be told, I did not even know what that was. And I did not have any role models. And I don't mean that as in like, oh, I didn't see any like Latina boss woman. Like, no, I did not see anyone have an academic job, period. Because my mom was even struggling to get a cleaning job. All the people in our community were either, cleaners, or they did dishes at a restaurant, or they had like very sort of like blue collar jobs. So I didn't even know of this world beyond that of like office jobs. Like what was that? I wasn't introduced to that until I would sit down and talk to my friends' parents. And I was like always so fascinated by like one of my friends, her mom, she wore like a pencil skirt and like a shirt, when, like a blouse when she came home from work. And I was just like, what does she work with? Like, you can't clean in those clothes, like, and I was just fascinated. And I started having a great interest in this alternative universe, which was, my white friends' realities. And I actually would spend a lot of time kind of like interviewing their parents, and like they would find me in the kitchen talking to their mom about like her job or interior design and whatnot. I didn't know what entrepreneurship was, but I I think I knew that I wanted something different than what my parents had. So I knew I was very determined to get an education for that reason, and to do well in school. I think most kids, they have their parents motivate them to, be good in school. For me, it was quite the opposite. My mom was worried for me because she felt like I was stressing myself too much with school, and she would be like, "Okay, after 9 p.m., no more books." Whereas I feel like usually it's like, okay, no more screens. Like, no, my mom was like, no more books. Like, you're working too hard. So I was just very self motivated from a young age, and I think just like had this idea and vision and dream of a different future.
Wow, that's so cool. You've definitely created that different future, different life. How do you get from, Sweden, growing up, starting to get this desire to want to change your circumstances, to New York, brand owner, entrepreneur, crushing it?
Sometimes when I think about it, it's actually quite insane to think about. I feel very fulfilled with my life today, and I feel extremely privileged to truly be living something that was not even a dream for me growing up. It was something that I did not even knew was possible. So it's quite a leap from where I come from, because not only am I an immigrant kid, who comes from a humble beginning, I also grew up in a tiny, tiny town in Sweden. My first step was that, okay, I want more, so I need to move out of this tiny town. Like, that was my first realization. And my wildest dream was to move to the capital of Sweden. Like, oh my God, can you imagine going from a tiny town to the, capital of Sweden? So I moved to Stockholm for school, and I started studying there. I graduated at the top of my class, and it felt, like I was ready to conquer the world. And I landed an internship at, this very prestigious brand that was based in Berlin. So then I moved to Berlin to pursue this internship. And I think those two experiences made me comfortable going out of my comfort zone, because once you have pulled yourself out of your roots once and survived, you can do it again. I then moved back to Sweden, and I embarked on my career for real. I guess it was my first job after graduating, and like after like internship and trainee program, and it was Uber. Uber at this time was a small startup from San Francisco, who were looking to test the waters internationally. For some random reason, they had picked Sweden as part of their roadmap. Sweden has a deregulated taxi market, so that's why, but still, it was so bizarre to me. They were looking for someone to run the demand side of the business. And the way Uber set up new businesses at the time was that they would have an operations person do all the driver, sort of like the supply side. And then they would have a community slash marketing person do the demand side. So like my job was to push demand, and then this other guy's job was to make sure there were cars on the road. So the two of us get this, job, and it's kind of insane because I am 22 at the time, and they did not know that I was 22, by the way. But I I honestly don't even remember how I got the job. I sometimes laugh about it because I think honestly I was just the only one that was crazy enough to take the job. To be quite honest, it wasn't that I was the most qualified and that's why they gave it to me. I was the only one naive enough to be like, this sounds fun, because we were not really set up for success. They were opening up this satellite office. There was going to be no one from the US here, and the first week into the job, they fired the general manager. So suddenly it's like just me and this other guy, and we have no support, no budget, but the expectation is that we're going to grow the business 20% week over week.
Right. Wow. Cool. We're going to do that.
Yeah. And I don't think I fully grasped what it means to grow 20% week over week. Like, people grow that year over year. Like, no, this is week over week. Like, talk about exponential growth expectations. But the reality is naivete is like the biggest asset. And I think that's something that when I look at young talent, I'm like, oh, you have it. It's like this like can do attitude that is so contagious. And if you believe it, others will too. And it's so crazy how like this world works, because we're all just, part of energy in a way. So like if you believe something so deeply, like you're attracting it. Like if you can manifest, if you can think it, it can happen. So we full-heartedly believe that all of this was possible. And the reality is Uber Sweden became the fastest growing market at the time for Uber. So suddenly this tiny little country starts to get a lot of attention at HQ, and our VP of operation flies out there and he's like, okay, I need to know what you guys are doing. And I thought he was like gonna fire us. I was like, what's going on? Like, what is he? Why is he here? And then he's like, puts out like pen and paper, and he's like, whatever you guys are doing here, we need to write it down. We're doing this everywhere. And I was like, okay, is that a good thing?
Wow. And what were you doing? Like, what were the marketing initiatives?
Like when Uber launched in San Francisco, the value proposition was pretty clear. It was like, now I can suddenly get from A to B, because in San Francisco, it was actually really hard to even get a cab. So Uber was revolutionary just by hygiene factor. Like, oh my God, I can get a transportation. In Sweden, that's not really the case. We had reliable taxis, taxis that were safe, and the taxi companies even had apps themselves. Sweden is pretty high tech. The subway is reliable. Like people bike everywhere. Like transportation was not an issue. So Uber had to provide additional value for it to, strike through. And so my sort of early on initiative was to build a really strong brand around it. We were like, Uber is a choice. It's a lifestyle. It's a better way to get around. It's not just about getting from A to B. And this was during the time that Uber only had the black car service. And so we were sort of like really pushing this idea of democratizing the private driver experience. Like also taxis in Sweden are really expensive. So kind of around the same price as a regular taxi, you could now get more of a black car experience. And we did these photo shoots, and we partnered with all the cool nightclubs. We did VIP parties where like if you strike certain points with Uber, you would get to skip the line to the hottest club. And it was like very much like, you know, building a brand and hype and kind of like a lifestyle movement around it.
Wow, amazing. And I'm guessing this story goes along the line that somewhere in America, they're like, we need Babba. She's coming to work for us.
I mean, I was such a dork, to be honest. I think like I fitted at Uber so well because Uber was a dorky company. Like there was a bunch of engineers, like everyone was super data driven. But then at the same time, it was also operating at the heart of pop culture. Like suddenly like rappers were mentioning Uber in their songs, and it became part of like this movement. But we were not really equipped for that cool factor internally because most of us were dorks. And I think it worked into my advantage that I had a little bit of both. Like I was sort of like the dork that worked really hard. I'm a good girl, I want to do well. But then I also love to have a good time. A lot of my friends were in like, in the hospitality, party, music, artists, creatives. A lot of my friends were in tech. So I naturally, were able to understand many different sort of like communities that were important for Uber. So eventually, I embarked on a really exciting journey with Uber where I got to travel to different markets, host marketing summits, and really bring together new talent that were, newly hired as marketing managers, and sort of like relay the playbook. And like, this is how we launched Uber in Sweden. These are like the key learnings. These are things that are very replicable in other markets, and start to like create more of like a summit and mentorship and playbook environment. And then after 2 years, I was offered the opportunity to relocate to New York, and this was like, I think for some people that would have been like a dream come true, but For me, I didn't even really like New York at the time. I had just like visited twice and I thought it was like, I don't know, too big. I was just stuck in traffic all the time. But my husband was in love with New York. I know, like literally stuck in Ubers. And my husband at the time he was also in the tech industry and he was opening up an office in New York for his business because he had gotten a New York based investor. So I had that as sort of like the incentive for us to why New York. I decided to, move over to New York with him, and I was working at Uber. He was running his startup. And I'm so glad I did. I'm still here, and literally someone will have to drag me out of this city because I'm obsessed. This is my home. I love it. I have two kids now and I'm still here. Like, everyone always thinks that like, oh, New York is, temporary, like wait until you build a family. But I can't think of a better place to live, and what a magical place to build a family.
Gosh, it is so much fun in New York, isn't it? Such good food, such good vibes. You spend, a couple of years working in these amazing startups. You then go on to create your own marketing agency and kind of flourish from there. And then you start to launch Ceremonia. Talk to me about deciding to start the beauty brand. What gave you that inspiration to like switch gears?
Yeah, so talk about switching gears. My experience at Uber had nothing to do with beauty, and it was all about an app and software, whereas beauty is about physical products. But I think for me there were sort of like two driving forces. So on one hand, I started to pick up an interest in beauty from a marketing standpoint because I was running a brand marketing agency, and many of our clients were in beauty. We were advising brands such as Glossier, for instance, who were kind of like pioneers in like this new era of beauty brands. We had a hair brand, we had a skincare brand, and whatnot. And it was during this time that I started to do a lot of research within the beauty sector, and I realized that the future of beauty is clean. I think that was like the first like aha moment for me, um, and to the point where the future of beauty is clean, period. So being a clean brand is not even like a unique selling point. That's going to be table stakes. So is sustainability. And then the third leg into sort of like the future of beauty is inclusivity. It was very clear to me how the customers were demanding greater representation, and the brands were falling really short in delivering that. So knowing that the future of beauty was clean, sustainable, and inclusive, it was interesting to me to see how most brands in the market were none of those things. And then when I started to break down what that means in the different categories within beauty, hair was the one category that really, sparked my inspiration, because it became very clear to me how a lot was happening in the beauty sector and a lot of new brands were popping up. It was kind of a very crowded space, but most of the innovation was happening in the skincare category and even in makeup to some degree at this point, but very little was happening in the hair category. So hair, for some reason, was this like dusty, forgotten about category within beauty that was very dominated by a styling first approach. And it's interesting when you think about it, because most people's hair routine has only to do with styling, which is the equivalent of putting makeup on your hair. And that's totally fine. Like I put on makeup sometimes, and like I want to enhance, my look for the day, but my foundation is not gonna reduce my breakouts on my face, right? So my hairspray is naturally also not gonna rebuild my hair. And when you started to scratch the surface on the hair category, it became very clear that the industry was dominated by a celebrity obsession, celebrity hairstylist brands, and a styling first approach that was very toxic, not only from a beauty standard perspective, but also from an ingredient standpoint. And then when you look at the skincare aisle, so much was happening. We were seeing more diversity. We were seeing natural ingredient powered formulas. We were seeing brands that were sustainable and free of a long list of toxins. And I was like, what about that for hair? Like, where is the skincare-ification of hair care? And it got me running on this, deep research and quest for a hair wellness approach. Basically, flipping the script of hair care and bringing a wellness approach to the hair aisle. And I felt particularly motivated to do so when I found the next part of my research, which became my other driving force. And that was this mission to illuminate the next generation of Latinx. And so, as a Latina woman, I never saw myself represented. I was going to say in the media, but honestly, period. Like, I just never saw myself represented in any success stories. I never opened a magazine and saw a Latina woman building a big business. I never saw a campaign with people with natural hair like this that was just like, big, frizzy, not curly, not straight, the big in between. I was born during an era of straight, pin straight hair. It had to be straight and shiny and blonde. So I embarked on what I today refer to as a beauty prison. I started straightening my hair, I started coloring my hair, and essentially I just embarked on this journey of damage. I was just damaging my hair over and over again. More importantly, I lost touch with my heritage because in an effort to assimilate and fit in, I started to subconsciously shave off part of my Latinidad. And little by little, I started feeling less and less proud of my heritage. And now, as a young adult, I was looking back at this sort of like realization, and I started to ask myself, what would it have been like for me if I would have seen people from my culture winning? Like, what would have been different for me if I would have seen myself represented, if I would have seen other people with my kind of background doing awesome things and being highlighted in a beautiful and celebratory way? So when I then looked at the data for the Hispanic demographic in the US, it really fueled my fire because we account for the biggest minority in the United States. We're already 20% of the population. We're the fastest growing demographic. We're growing 7 times faster than any other demographic. And more importantly, we're obsessed with beauty. And I can testify to that as someone who grew up, with all these beauty rituals at home. And we're seeing it in the spending power too. And I think historically, there has been this limiting belief that Hispanics don't have the spending power, that they're this, immigrant community that can't afford anything, that they don't speak the language, that they have sort of like weird shopping behaviors or whatever. But nothing could be more outdated than that belief, because the reality is that 65% of the Hispanic population today are people that were born in the US. So the majority of the Hispanics in the United States are actually born and raised here. They're equals. Like we are no different than our white counterparts, and we're vastly different from our parents' generation. So the time is now to bring something to market that really authentically represents the richness of our culture. I also think it's way overdue because so many of the sacred beauty rituals that are proven and so many of the powerful natural ingredients stems from our culture and our region, and we just haven't owned it. So Ceremonia is the answer to all of this, to all of these voids, from a beauty market standpoint, from a personal mission standpoint. And the answer is a clean hair care brand that is very proudly rooted in my Latin heritage and that is offering a hair wellness approach through modern day rituals that are powered by natural ingredients from Latin America.
Gosh, amazing. And now there will be new generations of women looking in the media and seeing themselves represented by people like you who are, forging their own pathways. I read that you were one of a really small number, like 58 Latina women to have ever raised your first $1 million in capital. And money is a big part of what we love to talk about on the show. It's very important, especially as women, especially as Latina women. What was your approach to the funding piece? Why did you decide to raise and not bootstrap? And how did you kind of get started on that journey?
Yeah, I love that you bring this up because something that actually most people don't know is that, in all these equality conversations about like women make, whatever cent on the dollar to men, the percentage of the dollar just goes down and down based if you're a woman and then if you're a woman of color, etc. Latinas are at the bottom of that bucket. We actually make even less than Black women per dollar. And not that it's a competition between, race or, different type, but just to put it in perspective. And I think what's interesting when you think about that is that Latina women are constantly overlooked. Not only are we not even really part of diversity conversations, we're also at the far end of the spectrum when it comes to earnings. So truth be told, that's why it was so important for me to fundraise. There are many ways to build a business, and I'm not saying that the fundraising experience is, easy or fun or, for everyone. But I knew that it was the right one for me and for my business because I want to build a category defining business. I'm really here to disrupt the hair care category. This is not my pet project. This is not a cute family run business that's going to grow 5% year over year. Like, we're quadrupling the business every year.
You're on that 20% week over week.
Like, actually. So in order to do that successfully, I needed funding to accelerate. And I also felt like it was important. I felt like it was important to create a benchmark in the industry, and hopefully we become one of those success stories, and we can then be the benchmark for future founders to come and be like, oh, we're the Ceremonia for X, because benchmarking is incredibly important. And I don't say this often enough, but I'm so grateful to some of the other trailblazing women that paved the way for me. I might be the first Latina to, be walking this trail, but there are other women who walk this trail before me that is even making it possible for me to be the first Latina. It's very personal and very mission driven for me.
I love that. I want to jump into the marketing side of things and your launch. You come from this marketing background, you've got so many ideas, you've got so much experience. You go out, you start this brand, you raise capital. How did the launch go? Like, what were you doing? What were those grassroots kind of initiatives in the early days to get the word out there?
Yeah. So a lot of people obsess a lot over their launch, and it's like they are really like, oh, the launch has to be, this big thing and whatever. I think I was coming at it a little differently because at Uber, we never had this like one launch day and then that had to be like the record day of the year or anything like that. We were more in the business of things are better done than perfect and get something out the door quickly so you can start getting feedback and iterate. We actually launched with one single SKU. We launched before we even had a full routine. And that was very intentionally so because we wanted to get the brand out the door sooner rather than later so that we could start acquiring customers and learn from them and get their feedback in where we should go next. I'm a big believer in like launch and iterate versus like sitting behind closed doors, spending all your capital on this, imaginary launch day that truthfully no one cares about. Like, on launch day, you're the only one who's sitting there like on needles. Like, it takes time to build a brand is the reality. So like, just because you hit go live doesn't mean that people are going to run across the internet to find you. You need to earn that, and it takes time. So we launched in the height of the pandemic. It was far from ideal. We couldn't do a launch party. We couldn't do a press event. We couldn't do desk sides. We, couldn't even do focus groups. Like it was just like suddenly we were left with WhatsApp and Instagram as our tools. But we did what we could with what we had. And I'm really grateful that we weren't sitting around waiting for better times, because in these past 2 years, we've now built a really big and successful business when some people have been on somewhat of like a standby. I don't know what I'm making of that more than like, don't overthink it and like just get started somewhere, and like one foot like in front of the other. I don't know, that's a saying in Spanish. For us, the early wins were really to learn from our customers and our community, get something out there and start getting feedback.
Get that feedback loop going.
Yeah. So, and we still work that way. So in the early days, it was just very DIY. We had a WhatsApp group where I just literally like found people who were our target demographic, and I had them try early samples and record themselves to give us their verdict. And then we ended up loving the footage, and I asked if we could use it for launch because we didn't even have any photo shoot materials because it was COVID and literally everyone was in lockdown. These early community members just became such like vital parts of the brand, and they were like my emotional support, and they also in turn felt like we were really creating something that they wanted and needed, and today that has grown and become a fully fleshed community strategy for the business.
I love that. And it kind of goes back to that, done is better than perfect. Like just, it can be scrappy, it can be DIY. It doesn't need to be some big fancy, software that you're collating and which it probably is now, but it's just getting started, and just pull in those voices and listen however possible. What's shifting the needle for you now in marketing? Like how have you evolved over the years since COVID and since the whole pandemic thing that we're still kind of on the back of? How has your marketing evolved?
It's constantly evolving, and that's I think the beauty and the challenge with being a growing business is that nothing is constant. The only constant is change, but we have tried to like hold on to the parts that made us successful in the first place, which our like product development strategy, our community. But then as we grow, we have put a stronger emphasis on brand building, and really to like make it more clear where in the market we belong. And it's like starting to say no to things. For instance, everyone asks us like, oh, would you partner with a hair salon? And like, why are you not in hair salons, etc. And it's like that's that's a great example of a strategic decision to say no, because we don't belong next to all the toxic styling products, and people go to the hairdresser to color their hair, and they usually get a blowout and like straighten it. And a lot of the hairdressers were schooled in the old school era of using silicones to give the illusion of shine on your hair, and they use products filled with a lot of ingredients that we ban. So we actually don't belong there. We would belong much better in a spa, actually. It's really constantly thinking about what is the brand and what is not the brand, and then living by that truth through all of your decisions. And then more practically, we are now starting to scale up the things that we have seen work. So for instance, influencer marketing actually works really well for Ceremonia. We see that content is key for us, and we like the duality of being this recognizable, relatable brand with, like real girls, but then at the same time being aspirational and sort of like polished. It's like that duality that is interesting and gives the brand depth. So we try to keep a balance between some more polished, high-end campaign shoots that are, more glossy and in studio, and then mixing that with iPhone footage and ideally mixing these two together.
I love that. Gosh, the quality of iPhone content these days is like so good. So good. I feel like it should be part of everyone's strategy. I mean, as it is, we're all on Reels, we're all on TikTok, but having that kind of brought to a website is very cool.
I agree. I hate nothing more than amateur photography trying to look polished. Then it's so much better to just own that it is DIY. Like the customers love the realness. Even when I do tutorials and stuff, like I literally like I'm without makeup. I put the phone in my bath. I don't even have a tripod. Like it's just like very like authentic. We see that that's really what resonates because people see themselves.
Mm. Yes, I love that. People see themselves and people need to see themselves in social media, in brands, on shelves.
And you believe it when it feels, perfectly unperfect,
Absolutely. When you think about the lessons you've learned in starting this beauty business, is there anything that you wish you knew before you got started that you can share with our listeners?
On the supply chain side of things, I could go on, but it gets very granular and like very, specific to my type of business. But honestly, and here is actually one thing to know about me is that I don't really live a life in regrets. I'm really grateful for all experiences, even the hardest ones, because usually those are the ones that allow you to grow the most. Sometimes it's hard for me to look back and think about like, oh, what is like the biggest like mistake we made, or like one decision I could undo. Like I wouldn't change anything. It's all part of the journey.
Absolutely. All leads you here to today. You mentioned at the start of this episode that you're going through a raise at the moment. Is there anything you want to shout about? Anything you want to kind of end on before we get into the 6 quick questions?
Yeah, I mean, I can just give a little like a gratitude moment for where we are. And this is truly thanks to our community. As I said, we launched 2 years ago with one single SKU. And today we have a full assortment of 15 products, and they're all made fully in-house. We have our own chemist, our own R&D lab, which allows us to create products from scratch on our terms without compromise. And more importantly, it allows us to co-create with our community because we can, in our own kitchen, get 300 samples if we want to and send out to our community. Whereas usually when you're working with a traditional contract manufacturer, they will send you 3 tiny samples. And then they're like, okay, so did you like the formula? You're like, based on these 3 tiny samples, like, and we're going to produce 20,000 of them? That's insane. But that's usually how it works. And so I feel really proud how we have really flipped the script for how beauty is done by bringing much needed representation, not only in front of the camera, but also around the table. The market is noticing. We're getting so much momentum through PR and, awards. We've won over 10 awards for our formulas, which is so incredible. We launched with Sephora this year, which was a true pinch me moment. And we're expanding with them next year, which is really exciting. So more to come there. This first 2 years was all about establishing our brand, improving our product market fit. And now we're in this high growth acceleration point.
So exciting. So exciting. Love that for you. All right, we are up to the 6 quick questions part of the episode, some of which we might have covered, some of which we might not have covered, but I kind of just asked them all the same because it goes into part two of the episode. So question number 1 is, what's your why? Why do you wake up every single day and work on Ceremonia?
My why is definitely this desire for representation and to really be part of the change that I wish already existed, and hopefully be the founder that I could have looked up to when I was a young girl.
Love that. Love that. Question number 2 is, what's been your favorite marketing moment so far?
Oh, we have many, but I think the most recent, like, holy crap moment was this last Hispanic Heritage Month. Hispanic Heritage Month is mid-September to mid-October. And we celebrated it by entering Sephora, and they gave us a billboard in Times Square with a photo of me and a quote as to why Latinx Heritage Month is so important to me. And to top it off, we felt like we had to celebrate this monumental moment with our community, which is where it all started. And we had a Shiva, which is this like Colombian party bus, take everyone from downtown Manhattan all the way to Times Square, and with a Latin, like American DJ playing like Bad Bunny on repeats all the way. And then we showed up at Times Square, we see the billboard, and then we storm into Sephora to experience the Ceremonia tower inside of the store. And we had this like big sign that said the future is Latinx. And it just felt this like, I think that was one of those moments where I was like, this is so much bigger than hair. It's so much bigger than me. This is a movement, and our win is the entire community's win.
Wow, what a profound moment. A really profound moment to be able to see that and celebrate that with other people around you who are just as excited. How exciting. I love that. Question number 3 is, what's your go-to business resource if you have to think about like the books or the newsletters or the podcasts that you're consuming at the moment?
I love reading. It's hard with 2 small children. I have, 2 kids under 2, but reading is my best form of inspiration. I love reading books that are either philosophical, like sort of like self-help book that are sort of like mind expanders, or management books that are about almost like biography from like a founder. That's my sweet spot.
What are you reading at the moment?
Right now, I'm actually reading about the Spotify journey. I don't know if the book has hit the US yet. I bought it when I went to Sweden for work, and it's called Spotify from Within. And it's this very investigative journalism, breaking down every step of the success of Spotify. And it's so inspiring. I'm like sweating while I read it because I'm also like so stressed for him. I'm like, oh my God, like he deserves all this success. Like it was not easy.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to add that to my list of when it's available here to order that. That sounds amazing. Thank you.
It's so good.
Question number 4 is, how do you win the day? What are your AM or PM rituals or habits that keep you feeling happy and successful and motivated?
Yeah, for me, it's all about the balance between motherhood and career. And those are my 2 greatest priorities in life right now. I think of them as very complementary to each other. And my family life is a grounding force for my career self, and my career self makes me a better mom too, because I feel like I fill my cup and I show up to my family fulfilled and excited. So I'm really focused on that. So my mornings are usually dedicated to the family. We're up pretty early. I make steel cut oats, which takes like 20 minutes to make. And I have my little baby on her bouncer, like the 6 months old. She's just like looking at me like this while I'm cooking the oats. And I prepare breakfast for my toddler. Then I wake her up. She's a bit of like a heavy sleeper, so I have to like wake her up with a little head massage. And I don't know, it's just such a lovely. I was never a morning person like this, but it just brings me so much joy. And then the best part is that by 8 a.m., she's out the door to go to school, and I get an hour for me before I usually start my workday. And that's when I can do a Peloton workout or a yoga class, or I take a steam sauna shower before. Yeah. And I usually just have my little baby on her bouncer, literally just like outside the steam sauna. And I'm like, hi, I'm still here.
Oh, cute. My gosh, love that. Question number 5 is, what's been your worst money mistake? I know we talked about no mistakes, but what's been your worst money mistake and how much did it cost you?
So I don't know if it's so much a money mistake, but I guess a business mistake that almost made me go bankrupt. It almost folded my last business. When I was running my brand marketing agency, I had a really bad accountant who was I was going for cheap versus good. And I really had to pay my dues. So he advised me in the wrong way, or maybe he misunderstood my business. I don't know. Bottom line is that he had set it up in a way where I was not able to, it was set up in a way where it was always meant to be a one woman show, which was never my ambition. So then when I started hiring people, he never told me to get workers' comp insurance or something like that. I don't know. It's not a thing in Sweden. And I'm an immigrant here in the US. I was like, what is this? So suddenly I get this penalty letter that says that I now owe the government, I don't remember how many thousands of dollars per week that I haven't had workers' comp insurance. And I had people on payroll for like a year and a half. And it was like per employee per week. And I was just like doing the math, and I was like, okay, obviously we're gonna pay it. And then I do the math and I'm like, actually, we can't. And I look at my bank account and I'm like, ah. Uh, and I also had no savings at this time. All my money was tied in my stock options at Uber. So I had no wealth. And I was about to pull my hair out. But luckily, I found a really incredible accountant who is a woman, and she helped me through these and helped me write like a letter for forgiveness, and sort of like explain the situation that I had been, wrongly advised, and that as much as I, want to pay this penalty, it would mean that my business would go bankrupt and 10 people would lose their jobs. And like, I'm asking if there is an alternative way. And like, I am a first time founder. I am an immigrant. And like, it's like all these things. I don't even remember exactly how she worded it, but she really did an incredible job. And then we got a response, and they reduced it to like, I think I had to pay like $500.
Oh my God, that is so full on. Wow. Okay. Lesson learned, good accounting.
I know, this is a good accountant, like literally like your numbers, like, yeah. That you can't mess that one up.
You can't mess that one up. Holy shit, that's crazy. That's crazy. And the last question is another crazy one. It's just, what is a crazy story, good or bad, that you can share from this journey in building your business? That one was already crazy. So I don't know if you've got another one.
I mean, another crazy one is that I launched Ceremonia out of the NICU, basically the ER for babies. I was highly pregnant when I started working on Ceremonia. And I had this amazing plan that I was going to launch Ceremonia. And then a month later, I was going to give birth. And I was probably going to go over. So it was going to be a month and a half, more likely, because I said that, right? So that was my plan in my head. What happened instead is that my daughter came 5 weeks early. And so I go into very sudden labor, and I have my daughter. She ends up at the NICU because she's 5 weeks early. And she was completely healthy. She just needed, more supervision, etc. So like, just want to point that out there. And she's a healthy 2-year-old today with a strong will. But bottom line is, I was in and out of the NICU, and this was during COVID. So when my husband was going in to say hi to the baby, I had to be in the waiting room. We couldn't even go in together. It had to be, one at a time. And, full shield and masks, like not what you expect your motherhood journey to be like. And I think because I was so high on life that I had become a mother, I was so proud and I was so obsessed with this little baby, I didn't have space for negativity. So I just kept going. I was like, no, life is awesome. I'm a mom. My baby is here and she's alive, and, she's getting the best care possible. So we're sticking to the Ceremonia launch plan. Don't worry. And I am doing an interview with Forbes, like my launch interview with them, out of the waiting room at the NICU. And like, when I tell this story, it sounds so crazy. And like everyone is like, oh my God, like, was the baby okay? Are you okay? Like, we were all okay. It was just this weird, like, unlock of a superpower. I really felt like unstoppable. Yeah, I love being pregnant. I love giving birth. I love being a mom. And it unlocked an incredible source of just like power for me.
Magic. It's amazing. Wow. That's another crazy one. That's powerful. My gosh, superwoman.
You're like, cool. Do you have more? Do you have more crazy stories?
Oh my gosh, Babba, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your journey. Wow, I'm just so impressed. So amazing. Congratulations on everything that you've achieved so far.
Thank you so much for having me and for doing this. Honestly, this podcast is so important, and this is exactly what we need more of. So thank you for doing what you do.